You buy a cheap electric car online, and somewhere in Europe, a factory manager quietly starts sweating. The car looks clean, the price looks impossible, and your wallet, because your wallet is not paid to care about German employment statistics, thinks this is a beautiful moment. Then the trick appears. That cheap car is not just a car. It is the final product of a machine that began years earlier. With cheap loans, battery subsidies, provincial governments, land deals, steel plants, rare earth processing, shipping networks, and a domestic market so large that mistakes can be absorbed before the product ever reaches you. This is not a normal company competing with another normal company. This is an industrial system competing with another civilization's spreadsheet. And Europe is discovering that spreadsheets do not punch very hard. For decades, Europe believed it had the elegant version of capitalism: high engineering quality, strong labor protections, environmental rules, independent regulators, careful trade law, a deep respect for process, which is a very European way of saying that nothing important should happen quickly. Then China built the future industries Europe wanted to own: solar panels, batteries, electric vehicles, drones, steel, green technology. The same products Europe needs for its climate transition are increasingly produced by the country Europe sees as its biggest industrial threat. Awkward. Because when your enemy sells you the tools required to save your planet, your moral clarity begins to look like a procurement problem. The International Energy Agency has described China's dominance across the solar photovoltaic supply chain. Photovoltaic just means turning sunlight into electricity. China controls most of the key steps, from polysilicon to wafers to cells to modules. In plain English, China does not just make the finished panel. It controls much of the industrial kitchen that cooks the ingredients. Cheap Chinese panels helped Europeans install renewable energy faster. Great for consumers. Great for climate targets. Not so great for European manufacturers trying to survive while their competitors produced at scales that made European balance sheets look like school projects. This is the first uncomfortable truth. China is not breaking Europe's industrial machine by selling bad products. It is breaking it by selling good enough products at prices Europe struggles to match. That is much worse. If the products were terrible, Europe could laugh, regulate, and move on. But when the products are cheap, improving, and available right now, your idealism meets your electricity bill, and your electricity bill usually wins. Then the engine changed. Electric vehicles look like cars. But economically, they behave more like batteries on wheels, with software attached. The old European strength was combustion engineering. Combustion means burning fuel inside an engine to create motion. Pistons, gearboxes, exhaust systems. Decades of mechanical refinement. Bide began as a battery company. Cattle became a battery giant. Chinese cities built charging networks. The state used subsidies, tax breaks, procurement rules, and industrial policy. Industrial policy simply means the government choosing strategic industries and pushing money, rules, and infrastructure toward them. In economics textbooks, this is supposed to be slightly suspicious. In the real world, it can be brutally effective. Mariana Mazzucato, the economist who wrote The Entrepreneurial State, has argued that governments have often shaped major innovations, not merely watched from the sidelines. China took that idea and removed the polite seminar tone. It built capacity. It tolerated waste. It let too many companies fight. Then the strongest survived and expanded. Chinese industrial policy is not just subsidies. Subsidies are only the visible part. The deeper advantage is ecosystem density. Battery makers sit near car makers. Component suppliers sit near battery makers. Local governments compete to attract factories. Engineers move between companies. A massive domestic market gives firms data, scale, and pressure. Scale is a boring word until it destroys your job. In 2015, China's electric vehicle share was tiny. By 2024, academic research estimated it had risen to roughly 45% of the Chinese auto market. That kind of shift is not a trend. It is an industrial earthquake. Now, imagine being a European car maker. You spent decades perfecting engines that policymakers now want to phase out. You face high energy costs after Russia's invasion of Ukraine shattered the old assumption that cheap gas would always flow into European factories. You face stricter climate rules. You face unions that quite reasonably do not want thousands of people thrown into the economic shredder. You face shareholders who still want profits. And then a Chinese electric vehicle arrives with a lower price. decent range, better software than expected, and a brand name your customers can suddenly pronounce. What exactly is your move? Cut prices and crush margins. Margins are the money left after costs. No margin means no investment. Protect the market with tariffs. Tariffs are taxes on imports. They can slow a competitor down, but they do not magically make your factories efficient. The European Union eventually imposed extra duties on Chinese-made electric vehicles after an anti-subsidy investigation. Countervailing duties, the formal term, are tariffs meant to offset unfair state support. The idea was simple. If China's state support pushed prices artificially low, Europe would raise the import cost to create fairer competition. But tariffs create a strange mirror. They can protect an industry. They can also reveal that the industry already lost the cost race. If Europe needs a tax wall to make its electric cars competitive, that is not victory. That is an invoice for delayed adaptation. Joseph Schumpeter called capitalism a process of creative destruction. Old industries are destroyed as new ones replace them. It sounds elegant in a book. It sounds less elegant when the destroyed part is your town, your mortgage, and your child's apprenticeship. This is why Europe's China problem is not only about trade, it is about time. China moved fast when the new industries were still messy. Europe debated. China overbuilt. Europe regulated. China subsidized. Europe investigated. China exported. Europe held hearings. China cut prices again. That does not mean China's model is painless. It creates overcapacity. Overcapacity means factories can produce more than the market can absorb. It leads to brutal price wars, weak profits, debt, and wasted investment. Chinese solar executives themselves have warned that demand cannot easily fix the industry's excess capacity. When factories can produce nearly double estimated global demand, somebody somewhere is going to bleed cash. But here's the twist. China can sometimes survive that bleeding longer than Europe can. Because the political goal is not always immediate profit. Sometimes it is employment. Sometimes it is technological dominance. Sometimes it is export power. Sometimes it is making sure the next global supply chain runs through Chinese factories before anyone else notices. Europe, meanwhile, often asks each factory to behave like a normal commercial actor inside a high-cost society with strict rules and expensive energy. That is morally cleaner. It is also harder. David Ricardo, the economist behind comparative advantage, argued that countries benefit when each specializes in what it does relatively best and trades with others. Comparative advantage means you do not have to be the best at everything. You focus where your opportunity cost is lowest. For a long time, Europe liked that story. Europe would design advanced products, protect high standards, import cheaper components, and export premium goods. Then the world changed. The cheap component supplier climbed the value chain. Climbing value chain means moving from basic manufacturing into higher profit, more advanced products. China did not stay in low-cost assembly. It moved into batteries, electric cars, green tech, robotics, and advanced electronics. So Europe is no longer simply trading wine for solar panels. It is trading pieces of its industrial future for cheaper inputs today. That is the financial trap, not for one person. For a continent, you get cheaper goods now. You lose productive capacity later. Productive capacity means the ability to make important things yourself. Once that disappears, it is not rebuilt with a press conference. A factory is not just a building. It is workers, suppliers, machine tools, tacit knowledge, logistics, and confidence. Tacit knowledge means know-how that lives inside people and routines, not inside instruction manuals. When a factory closes, that knowledge does not go into a neat folder labeled Europe's future. It leaks away. Because Europe wants three things at once. It wants cheap green technology to decarbonize. Decarbonize means reducing the carbon emissions that heat the planet. It wants strong domestic industries that provide good jobs. It wants trade rules that feel fair and lawful. The problem is that these goals collide. If Europe blocks cheap Chinese green tech, the energy transition becomes more expensive. If Europe accepts all cheap Chinese green tech, local manufacturers may collapse. If Europe subsidizes its own industries heavily, it risks copying the model it criticizes. If it refuses to subsidize, it may lose industries that China treats as strategic assets. Welcome to the trap. You can see the same thing in your own financial life. Buying the cheapest option feels rational. Of course it does. Daniel Kahneman, the psychologist who studied human decision-making, showed that people often focus on immediate, Visible costs more than long-term hidden consequences. Your brain loves the discount sticker. Is less excited about supply chain resilience in 2035. So you buy the cheaper car, your neighbor installs the cheaper panel, your government meets its climate target with cheaper imports. Everyone makes the rational short-term decision. Then one day, the local factory is gone. The apprenticeship program is gone. The supplier network is gone. The tax base is weaker. And the continent that wanted strategic autonomy discovers it, has strategically automated its dependency. Strategic autonomy is a fancy phrase meaning the ability to make critical choices without being trapped by another power. In plain English, it means not needing permission from the country that sells you your batteries, panels, rare earths, medicine ingredients, drones, and industrial parts. Europe talks about strategic autonomy because it learned from Russia that dependency can become a weapon. Gas was cheap until it was not. Trade was peaceful until it was not. Supply chains were efficient until they became leverage. China does not need to invade Europe to pressure it. It only needs to dominate enough critical links that European politicians feel nervous every time they consider saying no. Rare earths are a perfect example. Rare earths are minerals used in magnets, electronics, electric motors, wind turbines, and military systems. They are not always rare in the ground, but processing them is difficult, dirty, and strategically important. China built huge capacity in mining and processing. Europe now wants clean cars and wind turbines, but many of the invisible ingredients pass through Chinese control. Supply chains. That is not a conspiracy. That is industrial planning. And industrial planning beats wishful thinking almost every time. So what can Europe do? Protectionism means using tariffs, quotas, and restrictions to defend domestic industries from foreign competition. It can buy time. It can prevent a sudden collapse. It can stop predatory pricing, which means selling cheaply enough to kill competitors before raising power later. But protection without rebuilding is just an expensive pause. Europe needs speed, energy, capital, and focus. Speed means permitting factories faster. Energy means cheaper and more reliable electricity for industry. Capital means patient money willing to fund manufacturing, not just software apps and real estate. Focus means choosing strategic sectors and accepting that not every nice-sounding project can be a priority. China's advantage is not that it never makes mistakes. China makes enormous mistakes. Its advantage is that it can turn policy direction into physical capacity with frightening speed. Europe can write a brilliant strategy document. China can build the factory before the strategy document gets translated. That is the brutal comparison. And yet, the story is not hopeless. Europe still has world-class engineering, advanced machinery, strong universities, luxury brands, aerospace, pharmaceuticals, industrial software, and decades of manufacturing knowledge. The machine is not dead, but it is being stress-tested. China is forcing Europe to answer a question it avoided during the comfortable years of globalization. What must a wealthy society still make for itself? Not because imports are evil, not because consumers should pay any price for a local label, but because some industries are not just products. They are power. A battery is not just a battery. A solar panel is not just a panel. A car factory is not just a building. A steel mill is not just dirty old industry. These things decide who owns the next economy. And the next economy does not care how prestigious the old one was. So the next time you see a cheap Chinese electric car, do not just ask why Europe cannot build one at the same price. Ask what price Europe already paid to make that car look cheap. Ask which factory closed. Ask which supply chain moved. Ask which skill disappeared. Ask which politician discovered the word strategy about 10 years too late. Because the real story is not that China suddenly broke Europe's industrial machine. The real story is that Europe spent years turning the machine off, one rational purchase at a time. And now you buy a cheap electric car online, while somewhere in Europe, a factory manager quietly starts sweating.